We're excited this season to release a series of interviews that we were able to do in October of 2025 with folks around the nation of Scotland. Uplift is partnering with a lot of recovery organizations and churches in the country of Scotland, and their stories, their people, their situations are so similar to us that you're going to be helped just by hearing about the work that's going on, not just in our own backyard, but around the world as well.
It's called Soil and Soul by Alistair McIntosh. And it's a book that illustrates, I think, a lot of the things we're talking about, the parallels between our regions. And they're not just historical, but they're contemporary. So both regions, first of all, you've got the parallels in geography. And, you know, I do a lot of comparative mountain studies internationally because geography matters, place matters, doesn't it? So if you have similar terrain, you're going to have similar cultural development and similar economic opportunities and challenges. And so we see a lot of those contemporary parallels that have developed in Scotland and Appalachia alongside one another. So a lot of rurality, decline in legacy industries, and loss of manufacturing jobs, and all of those socioeconomic factors that then contribute to disparities in health and addiction and all the things that you work with. So the Gowgill Trust, as I said, was founded in the former shipbuilding center of the world, really, in Glasgow there. And now it's sort of an economic wasteland. But they specifically started programs, as I said, directed towards young men primarily, but they serve a wide population. One thing that they do there is they teach traditional boat building skills, how to build boats out of wood like the Vikings would have, or the early Celts, right? And then that skill set transfers over into a lot of other things. But they run a whole range of programs there. So I think you would really enjoy connecting with them and talking to what they're doing. So Alistair, his theological background, I think, is Quaker. And he weaves that theology kind of throughout his approach. And it's a real multifaceted, holistic approach to people.
That's really interesting. I think the thing that was most interesting to me is just like when we went over there, because she'd obviously been a couple of different times. I'd never been. I mean, we'd been in Zoom meetings with folks for, 6-8 months before we went over there. But every single person I met, and then every single place that I went, I felt like I already know every single person I'm talking to, and it's like, and that just kind of seemed like it made sense, right? Right. So I'm just going to kind of ask you. So why does it make so much sense that and granted, I've lived in Appalachia now for 30 years, right? We came in 95, so 30 years. Why does it make so much sense that I felt so at home there, or I felt so connected?
Right. Well, I think, again, it starts with place. It starts with landscape, While their mountains don't look the same as ours because we have all these trees and they don't, you have a similar rugged topography. And as I said earlier, that brings the same sort of impact on cultural transformation and development over the years that we feel. You also have a lot of rural population there and small populations that have similar notions of what it means to be a neighbor, for example, and those sorts of things. But then historically, there are connections between Scotland, Ireland, and Appalachia. There are a lot of misconceptions too, because a lot of people have in their mind that all of these Highlanders wearing their kilts and dressed like Mel Gibson came directly from the Highlands into Appalachia, and they came here because, hey, these hills look like home. And that's a historical misconception with a grain of truth, because the largest single group of European settlers in the colonial period who settled here in southern Appalachia were called the Scotch Irish, or the Scots Irish. And they were Scottish people who had colonized the north of Ireland during the time of King James, when he set out on his project led by the merchant guilds of London to establish plantations in Northern Ireland in the 6 counties of Ulster there. And most of those settlers were lowland Scots from the lowlands and from the border region between Scotland and England. They then settled in the north of Ireland, where they integrated with Irish customs, but they had brought their Scottish customs with them, and most of them were Protestant and Presbyterian with that religious heritage from Scotland. They brought their music with them, they brought their foodways, as people do when they migrate. And then that's the group that became the largest group of settlers in southern Appalachia. So just as they did when they had moved from Scotland to Ireland, they brought their culture and their traditions here to southern Appalachia.
Yeah. You talked about music, and I remember there was one night that we went to a restaurant. They advertised, we're going to have traditional Scottish music while you're eating your dinner, and we're eating our dinner, and they started playing. I was like, I feel like I'm at Dollywood right now.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, it was like this is something I would hear
Yes.
anywhere I go around here. Like
Right.
down to the chord progression, everything about it. It wasn't like there was anything that felt
Right.
I was like, is it going to feel like a slightly different flavor of what we hear? But it was almost
Right.
it felt almost exactly
Mm-hmm.
the same. And I think carrying that tradition over,
That's right.
it's like, but again, that kind of contributed to that me feeling like I was at home.
Yes, exactly. And over we've heard that. You know, I've been teaching study abroad in Scotland and Ireland for 15 years and taking students there. And a lot of our students are musicians. They're from our bluegrass program. And they'll have that same experience of going into a pub and playing music, and they find out they're playing the songs the same way that those folks are playing them. Because, you know, when people immigrated in the 16 and 1700s, and by the way, up until the time of the Revolution, at least 250,000, some estimates as high as 400,000, Scotch-Irish had immigrated to the colonies. It was the second largest group of immigrants behind the English to the American colonies at that time. So it was a huge cultural force, and a lot of them ending up here in southern Appalachia. But you know, when you're packing up to go across the sea, you can't take much with you, but you can take a fiddle, right?
Right.
And you can take the songs that you know, and they did that. They also, it's very interesting, a lot of folks have studied the ballad tradition in southern Appalachia, these old ballads that they brought with them from the British Isles. That primarily was a woman's role in the family. It was the women who remembered these ballads. And so you find when Olive Dame Campbell, the founder of the John C. Campbell Folk School in North Carolina in the early 1900s, and she was traveling through this area. She went to Flag Pond in western North Carolina searching for ballads. And they found these ballads still being sung. In some cases, they were more true to the original source material than they were being sung back in Scotland and England at that time. And so it was a very important cultural tradition they brought with them. They brought dance as well, which evolves into our folk dances today. Mm-hmm. They brought their foodways, they brought distilling, they brought their language. Michael Montgomery, who passed away a few years ago, was a linguist at the University of South Carolina. He was the expert on the impact of Ulster Scots, the Scotch-Irish dialect, on our language today, and he categorized the expressions that descend from that. They brought with them their ways of agriculture. You know, the idea of, you know, they were used to, in that environment, just as here, of figuring out how to farm up in a holler, as we would call it, right?
Right.
or a glen over there, right, in the valley. And so they brought those skills with them as well. They didn't come directly to southern Appalachia. They came through, of course, the ports of Philadelphia and Charleston, and
right.
then they made their way down. Sometimes it took 2 or 3 generations for them to end up here, but they still brought that culture with them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, because with bringing that culture, because this is the thing, is like when we start looking at, because again, like I said, we're talking about specifically addiction and recovery and things like that. It seems like some of those same, you know, health disparities have kind of cropped up.
Right.
Alongside each other, and I think our governments in both sides aren't exactly the same, but yet a lot of the same kind of disparity and the disconnection between, you know, kind of those rural areas finding themselves in those, and like you said, industry leaving for what that same kinds of things that have happened here in Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee. Is there a through line through there? Obviously, the industry I think is part of it. But it seems like a lot of these same struggles pop up. Are there any other through lines that maybe I haven't noticed yet, or things that are true?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it has to do, again, I'm a broken record, but I go back to geography. And in studying mountain regions around the world, whether I'm in the Carpathian Mountains or in the Sperrin Mountains of Northern Ireland, the Grampians of Scotland, you're talking about areas that geographically are isolated. Even if they're not they've never been as isolated as the myth, right? They were never completely cut off, right? But they were relatively more isolated, and they were far from the centers of power. So the political power is always on a river, on a coast, in the lowlands, and the further you get away from that center of power, the more marginalized you're going to find your communities. And so that shows up in stereotypes, and we find that in mountain regions all over the world, whether it's the hillbilly stereotype here in the United States, or whether it's the hill people or the clan people of the Highlands of Scotland. Read through some of the accounts of the English in the 17 and 1800s, like Samuel Johnson. I mean, they were so snobbish, again, a stereotype, but if you read through what they said about the Scots, they considered them to be barbarians.
Right.
And you find the same kind of language being written about the people of Appalachia later, and it comes from that marginalization. And over time, you've got not only that cultural marginalization and stereotyping, you've got the economic marginalization where those who hold the power are able to come in and extract the valuable resources, and then when the economy changes or the resources run out, then they're gone, and you're left with, a ghost town like we see in Ayrshire in Scotland, right? The same thing being reflected in the coal fields of Appalachia. So what do people do when a legacy industry that for generations has been a source of livelihood for their families and a source of pride because it's important work, it's hard work, it's dangerous work, it's work that directly has supported the entire country. I mean, the whole Industrial Revolution and the whole success of America in the 20th century was fueled on the back of coal, right? When that goes away overnight, how do you cope with that? And there's a lot of very physical factors, like how do I find my next meal? How do I earn a paycheck to support my family? But then there are all the psychological things that go along with that as well, I think.
All that desperation that you start to feel
Exactly.
after that. Yeah. One of the other things that you mentioned, and I was trying to think how to ask this, because you talked about kind of those negative stereotypes in some of those more rural areas and those things here. But at the same time, there are some strengths that kind of get developed in those communities. Because I mean, even I noticed this. I mean, we weren't in necessarily a rural area, but I mean, even in like some of the outskirt areas, when we were talking to a fellow in Glasgow, it's like he knew everybody. He had his close groups. Like, this is the area that my people move in, and we don't go over to that area where those people are. We hang out with our.
Right.
But I still think, even within the small towns here in Appalachia, it's like you still get that. Even though you have those disparities and you have those issues that crop up, you still have that really tight-knit community, which is a good thing in that they have it, but it also makes it a hard thing to kind of find ways to, integrate yourself into that community.
Right.
And so I think that's a kind of parallel that I've seen in both places. And I know you've obviously kind of walked in that world. In different. What are some ways that maybe you've seen people be able to kind of find themselves being welcomed into that kind of a community?
Right. I mean, that's a great point. And excuse me, I'll sort of start with what you referred to at first. Not only have there been historically negative stereotypes about mountain places, but there have been sort of romanticized stereotypes as well, always with a grain of truth that, people who are in the centers of power, who are in the cities, they look to people who are living in places like Appalachia with the incredible natural resources we have, the scenery, the slower pace of life, the small town atmosphere, and they want some element of that, right? We're seeing a population surge in southern Appalachia right now. People from all over the country are moving here because they are seeing those things, as well as other factors of quality of life that they want to be a part of, right? And I have found, while it's true that small towns anywhere, they develop sometimes a barrier to outsiders, and I think that's true, I've also found these communities to be incredibly welcoming of people. And one of the common touchstones that I see that can break down that barrier is to show enthusiasm for the culture of the place, right? So take music, for example. Over and over across southern Appalachia, and I've seen it when I've taken students and others to Scotland and Ireland, music is a great connector, right? Music is a great connector. So when you see someone playing an instrument and you also have an instrument, or if you're a singer, if you're just an audience member, you show appreciation for that. Or if you show appreciation and interest in the history of the place, all of a sudden barriers start to break down. And I've noticed in Southern Appalachia, and I'm sure it's true over there as well, sometimes the people who are most passionate about local history and culture and heritage are the transplants, the people who haven't grown up there. Because when you grow up in a place, you tend to sort of take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
But those from the outside can come in and showing that huge interest in a very respectful way. That can do wonders to break down barriers and find that commonality between people. Music transcends barriers worldwide. You know, it doesn't know politics, and it brings people together. So I think that's one way to do that. When we had our students last summer in Ayrshire with our friend Matt Cross, and he had a little exercise. We were in this tiny little village in the town hall there, and he had a little exercise, almost like a treasure hunt, where he sent students out in groups of twos with a couple of questions about local history that they had to ask a local to find out the answer to. And so here's a group of students from East Tennessee for the most part. Most of them have never been out of the country. They've never been on an airplane. And it's sort of intimidating to go out and find just a local walking down the street or in the market in this little Scottish village. But they did it. And I remember they came back and they said, one gentleman they flagged down and they said, hey, you know, we're here from America and we're studying. And his first response was, are you sure you're in the right place? And I could see that happening in a small town in Appalachia, right? You have a group of college students coming in to study the place, and I could see a local saying, are you sure this is where you want to be? This place, this small little town?
Right.
But they immediately were welcomed and formed a connection just by having
that interest in somebody else's history,
exactly.
their culture,
yes.
is a way to break down that barrier. That's
exactly.
That's really good. And I think we saw that, and I think I feel that too. Like if somebody comes here, I mean, we're not necessarily as rural, but it's like if somebody's interested in Johnson City, or if they, I mean, anytime I say I'm from Johnson City, like, oh, Wagon Wheel, you know, obviously that's where everybody first goes. Like, of course, yes, but at the same time, it's like, you know, my city. You know, I hear that song play when I'm somewhere else. I get a little proud. It's like, oh, that song mentions the place that I'm from, and so it's an easy way to kind of help people kind of let their guard down.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that is an easy way to start making those connections, which is going to be the way that we can kind of begin to work together and kind of kindle relationships and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So I just want to hear a little bit about the Global Year Scotland stuff, because obviously you've said you've been going back and forth for 15 years, that sort of thing. What is it that you've been either studying or trying to help students learn? What have been kind of your goals in doing a lot of this?
Well, I teach Appalachian Studies, and so we're interested in historical migration patterns and cultural connections. We call informally our study abroad the Appalachian migration in reverse, okay? We're going to go back and find out, you know, these Scotch-Irish, who were they? Where did they come from? What was their culture like? Why did they come here? You know, and we learn about the famines of Ireland. You know, everybody knows about the big potato famines of the mid-19th century, but they don't know about the famines that happened in the 16 and 1700s, successive famines that drove many people to have to migrate. They don't know about the highland clearances, and it wasn't just in the highlands, it happened in the islands and in the lowlands too, of these huge landowners in the late 17, early 1800s who were literally clearing people off their land who had lived there for generations so they could raise sheep on an industrial scale. So they don't know about a lot of these things. They don't know about the tenant system that was just squeezing people out. But they can connect to these things because we see parallels in our own time. We see the housing crisis that young people are dealing with today. They can relate to that tenant system that squeezed people out. We're studying migration patterns, and Appalachia has always been a conduit for migration, even going back 20,000 years ago when the very first Native Americans came into the region.
What are you trying to get? What is it? I guess a student who has begun to go back and forth with you, what is it that you're hoping is going to either change in them, or their eyes are going to be open to, or what is it that's going to be new about somebody that goes and experiences that part of culture as you're talking about all these kind of historical patterns?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. I think part of it is what you were referring to earlier, like exploring that question of what are the commonalities, what are the common roots? You know, what do I see in Appalachian culture that has historical roots in Scotland and Ireland? And why do we, when we go there, feel like this is home? You know, so studying those historical parallels, but what we want them also to see is we want them to see the contemporary parallels, the fact that their mountain regions are dealing with a lot of the same challenges we are, environmental challenges. We deal with mountaintop removal. In Northern Ireland, in the Sperrin Mountains, they've been fighting for years to stop a Canadian company that wants to put in a huge open pit gold mine, which is basically mountaintop removal, right? So they're dealing with environmental challenges. They're dealing with the same economic challenges, the health and addiction challenges. So we want them to see the contemporary parallels. And what can we learn from each other? What are they doing in Scotland that's working well that we could adapt here, and vice versa? And we see that all over. But beyond that, just in a general sense, we want them to see that people are the same around the world. We might be separated by political boundaries and cultural traditions, but we also have a lot of commonalities. And just by traveling and traveling to a place like Scotland or Ireland that has historical connections here is often a good first step for our students as they branch out and start to explore, the world. So I think it has a lot of benefits, and over students come back and they tell us that it was the best experience of their life, that they've been transformed somehow. Yeah. And often they'll stay in touch with our partners that we work with over there, like the Mellon Center for Migration Studies and the staff there. They form very human bonds and relationships that last.
And I know as a part of this, there are also folks from Scotland that are coming over here too. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what is Scotland interested in learning from us over here at this point? Is it kind of that same kind of exchange, or are they asking unique questions that are different because they're coming from where their perspective of us over here? Or?
I think a lot of the questions are the same, but the role of America in the modern world culture is unique, I think. And a lot of that has to do with, over there for centuries, they've heard these stories. Almost all of them have had some ancestors who migrated, right, to America or to North America and lived the American dream. And so they're always very curious about that. Their version or their vision of what America is, what the American dream is filtered through, many generations of stories, but also most powerfully is filtered through modern pop culture. Right, they watch all the Hollywood movies, that we watch. They watch the American television series. They listen to American music, and they have this image, just like we have an image of Scotland when we go there. That's filtered through pop culture representations, and so there's a lot of curiosity, I think, initially about what is it really like, and for going either way, we immediately learned that a lot of our impressions were not true, right? So that's one thing. But I think that there's just a lot of curiosity, but from both sides, about those historical connections and how they show up today. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of pride. Take Northern Ireland in particular, where most of the Ulster Scots came from. They have a huge sense of pride about the influence that the Ulster Scots, or the Scotch-Irish, same term, had on America. If you go to the town of Bushmills, the home to the famous Bushmills distillery, right, you will see that along the street they have these banners on the street poles. And these banners are celebrating Americans who had Scotch-Irish ancestry. So you will see Dolly Parton's picture there, and you will see John Wayne and Johnny Cash and Davy Crockett. You will even see one that has the Beverly Hillbillies on it, the Beverly Hillbillies television show. Because they claim that the term hillbilly came from Northern Ireland. I don't think that's true, but anyway, that's one of the legends about it. But there is that strong sense of pride that people left that place, and in most cases they left in extreme poverty, and then they made good, and they had an impact.
So there's some legacy that they feel a connection of legacy there too, which is that's an interesting way of thinking about it.
And if you think about it, I forget how many American presidents, something like 20 American presidents have some degree of ancestry from the Scotch-Irish, from Andrew Jackson, whose parents were from Northern Ireland and immigrated, so he was first-generation immigrant, all the way to Barack Obama. And so they're very proud of that as well, that these presidents have those roots there. Next year's the 250th anniversary of America. And so there's also a huge sense of pride on the role that the Scotch-Irish and the Irish and the Scottish had on the American Revolution, which was huge. there's a popular book out called How the Irish Won the American Revolution, because so many of the soldiers and generals in the American Revolution were of Irish ancestry or were Irish immigrants themselves. And of course, in this area, you bring that up, you talk about the Battle of Kings Mountain, right? And so the history of what they called the Over Mountain Men, who were not all Scotch-Irish, and they were not all Scottish, they were not all Irish. It was a mixture of all these folks, plus English and French and Welsh, all of those people, German, who came together, but a large percentage of them were Scotch-Irish, who traveled across the mountain to fight another Scotsman, Patrick Ferguson, the British major from Scotland, who was leading a force not of English but of American settlers who were loyalists to the British crown. He sends the message across the mountains that unless you're going to declare allegiance to King George, I'm going to cross the mountains, I'm going to burn your farms and kill you. And a lot of people point to this as sort of a legacy of the Highlanders, but most of them were not Highlanders, remember? But they were very independent people who had crossed over the mountains when it was illegal to do so, according to the King of England, and they had forged a settlement here, among the Native Americans, a very dangerous place to live.
Right.
So they were very independent. They, I think, definitely a legacy from their migration from the constraints in Scotland and Ireland is they were fierce about their political independence, and they were willing to fight for it. And we all know they won the Battle of Kings Mountain, and then that's the battle, even though most people have never heard of it when they think of the American Revolution.
Right.
They haven't heard of the Battle of Kings Mountain. But without Kings Mountain, that started the chain of events that led to the British defeat.
Well, I
at
think that just
Yorktown.
speaks to kind of that resilient spirit that I think a lot of people here and everybody that I talk to or over there kind of has. I think that's very interesting. I know I have one more question I want to ask you. Is there anything else I want to ask him while I've got him here? Anything else from you? Okay. The one question, so I ask everybody this question just because I get really interesting answers out of it, and I'm just curious. And so this can be related to something we've talked about. It doesn't have to be. It can be related to anything. What are you excited about right now?
Wow. Well, I'm excited about, I'm writing a grant right now, and it has to do with some of the things we're talking about. It has to do with music. And so I've been working for the last couple of years with Dr. Stephen Marshall on this initiative, originally called the Northeast Tennessee Music Initiative. And it's an economic development initiative. How can we, we know we live in an area that was a birthplace of a lot of the roots of American music, right? There's so many genres of American music that trace their roots to Appalachian music or were heavily influenced by Appalachian music. How can we do a better job of using that for economic development and supporting our musicians, supporting our venue operators? So we did a study last year in 2024, a music census of this area, the 8 counties of Northeast Tennessee, and it spilled over into Virginia and North Carolina. And we found out that just of the 1,200 people who filled out that survey, they account for more than $75 million a year of economic activity around music in this area. But it's scattered, right? We have Bristol doing its own thing and Johnson City doing its thing and Kingsport, North Carolina, Virginia. We're all doing our own thing. We're not pulling our resources together. So this is an idea, and we're writing a grant for the Appalachian Regional Commission to form sort of a central group that will help elevate the music ecosystem and the music economy in this region and provide a better source of training for musicians and how to be entrepreneurs, how to market themselves, how to deal with intellectual property laws, all of those things they need to know on the business side of musicianship that they don't want to think about, right? And then provide support for venue owners, how to be better business people in operating venues, to hopefully spur more economic development, to develop new music venues, and just lift that part of the economy across Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, where we all come together here. So it's a tri-state partnership. So I'm pretty excited about that. Of course, with our program in our department, bluegrass, old-time roots music, we're a big part of that kind of music economy. And this will be a chance for us to really get behind that effort and push it through. So not only will it help preserve a very rich cultural treasure and heritage, a lot of it came from Scotland and Ireland with other influences, but it's also a way to help develop business and economic opportunities in the region to help make up for some of these challenges as these legacy industries have declined and manufacturing has left and coal declines. What do we do in the region? We know tourism is a huge draw, and it's a huge part of the economic engine here. We can do better, we can do more to use music to drive that tourist economy.
This has been a podcast powered by Uplift Appalachia. To learn more, you can find us at upliftappalachia.org or at Uplift Appalachia on Instagram.